Are you tired of thinking that you suck, that your bike sucks? Do you clip pedals often, bottom out, and struggle for traction? Well, today's product might be something that fixes, well, it won't fix everything for you, but it might really help with your bike suspension setup. Let's review the new Slacker MTB Pro Kit. Are you setting up your sag like this? Are you setting up your sag like this? Or are you setting it up like this? Either way, you've got three very different numbers that you're gonna get. Plus you have to deal with getting off and accurately measuring this O-ring and assuming that it slide, rolled, and moved on the shaft. And of course that you have an easy shaft to measure. That's a big one, guys. Gotta have an easy shaft to measure. Linkages, hardware, shock placement, all that stuff could mean 1 or 2 millimeters difference, and you probably know every millimeter matters when you're measuring your shaft. So as you can imagine, right, with the seat slammed sitting on the seat, with the seat extended sitting on the seat, right, the leverage, your weight bias, your center of gravity are gonna be drastically different, especially if you compare that to a standing on the bike neutral position. All of the weight that you have shifting back and forth, whether your seat's down, seat's up here, or standing, is gonna mean your rear shock and your body weight is presented differently over the bike. Of course, then you're gonna be met with the challenge of getting off the bike without further compressing, moving that O-ring from where it's at. Of course, then as you can see, right, and you imagine you've got an O-ring that's not even, one that's dirty and gunked up, maybe it's not sliding smoothly. And why this matters is, right here we have a 170 millimeter travel bike with a 65 millimeter stroke shock, right? How does 65 get 170? Well, that's because of leverage ratios. So 65 millimeters is gonna mean 170 millimeters of movement back here. So for every 1 millimeter of movement here, you're more than doubling what is happening here. Now, assuming you can read this very accurately, you know where to stop your measurement. Is it at the bottom of that little dust wiper? Is it at the top? How far from the bottom? Where do you measure that from, right? All of that can mean maybe you're off by 1 to 2.5, maybe 3 millimeters in some bikes. Right? Think about like an Evil that's like all crazy and you've got a coil shock on there. It's gonna be really hard. So if you talk about 2.5 or 3 millimeters off here, that could be 5, 6 millimeters off at actual axle or rear wheel travel, right? Which is what matters. Now, before I get too much further, do you need this product? Do you have to have it? No, you do not. And I will tell you something, a very important piece of advice given to me: if you're gonna be wrong, be consistently wrong, because at least then you're consistent in your wrongness. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're always incorrect, but you're incorrect the same way, it doesn't really matter how you get to the solution as long as you can replicate that, right? So if you have a shock pump or a tire pump, right, that's off by 5 PSI, as long as you use that same pump every single time and you get the reading that you know you need to be at with that pump, you've got no problem. All right, so what are we getting into today? It is this Slacker, which is a digital sag meter reading device with live real-time sag numbers. We received this unit, I would say, over a year ago. We used it once and we thought it was a neat little, I don't know, tchotchke. Didn't really impress us because of the amount of work, effort, time it took, and so it kind of got buried. Fast forward into kind of like early 2025, and John, the founder, reached out to us and said, hey, I came out with a new product, right? These guys have a strong moto background where custom suspension tuning, focusing on suspension is really, really important. Why that matters is the way this device worked on a dirt bike was a lot easier than a mountain bike because they've got, you know, big seat fenders. So getting this device to work was a lot easier than it was on a mountain bike. So this is their new virtual fender kit. Now, this is going to basically clamp onto your seat post, and then coming out of this little device, which attaches to the hardware on your rear axle, there are a number of different attachments that are magnetically connecting to this piece. That will then slide into your rear axle, just like that. You will pull this string out and it will clip onto your rear fender attachment on the bike. It will give you live readouts instantly on what that sag number is. You can attach this little device to your handlebar, or if you have the Slacker app downloaded onto your phone, you can just look at your phone in real time. We've got a really cool little quad lock mount up there that you can look at it in percentage mode or in millimeter mode, like you get an actual live measurement, the number of millimeters. That's the system, that's how it works. Next up, I will say, this is not a paid review. They did not pay us to make this video. They did, however, offer our friends, family, subscribers, negative commenters 40% off if you use the code WOLFPACK. So you will get 40% off. They are also giving us an affiliate link to track sales. So we will receive a small commission on sales of this product. I wanted to be transparent with you guys about that. That is not the reason that we're reviewing this product. The reason we're reviewing it is because we have been using it a ton ever since this new virtual fender came out. It has made a huge difference in how we set up bikes, how quickly we can set them up, especially at our e-bike shootout, which we recently had. You know, having 5 guys, over a dozen bikes, just quickly going back and forth, just being able to get that set up easily. It's just the way to go for us, right? That being said, is this for everyone? Do you have to have it? No, I think we already went over that. But there are some very clear advantages, and this will get you to a correct, repeatable, and easy to set up sag point. Now again, sag is just a starting point, right? Everyone is different. Your terrain, your riding level, what you want out of your experience is gonna be different. But I will say, over the years, what I've noticed is that there are a lot of riders who are way, way off when it comes to sag. And it's cost them everything from broken toes to broken collarbones, or just really sore, miserable experiences because their bikes are too stiff or usually way, way too soft. So even if you don't end up buying one of these, I would ask you guys all to shoot for around a 30% sag measurement as a starting point on your bike. Verify that. You know, there's some really great ways, tools. There's a lot of very smart people who have tutorials and information. You can even go to ChatGPT and ask, I have this bike, how much sag should I have, right? And then you can kind of work that out. There are mathematical equations. Lots of smart people can tell you how to do that if you want to get nerdy into it. But we're going to keep it kind of high level for this, and more importantly, show you how it works and why it matters. All right, so here's a prime example. I know to the exact millimeter what I was at looking at that display. Now, if you look here at the shock, I reset the O-ring, did it how I normally would. Now, if you look back here, I'm pretty firmly at, like, I don't know, right at 30%, maybe like 29.75%. But here at the front of the O-ring, I'm over 30%. Because that thing just didn't roll over the shaft very smoothly. So where do I take a measurement, right? Obviously, sure, yeah, I could just slide it up, do it again and again until I'm convinced that it has moved smoothly and evenly. The next question then becomes, well, how do I measure it? Do I measure it to the end of this the little dust seal O-ring here? Do I measure it from the end to the top? Where do I go? And of course, on a really open and easy bike, you could probably get pretty close. But if you're talking about a bike that's within a bunch of weird, crazy structures, it's very easy to be off by 1 mil, 1.5, 2 millimeters even. And then all of a sudden, that starts getting amplified by the farther out it goes and the deeper into the travel you get. So yeah, like I said, it's very easy to take a bike that looks like 30% sag, right? Well, in reality, 59 millimeters is not 30% sag. 65 millimeter stroke, 170 millimeter bike, 51 millimeters is actually what I need for sag. Right now, I'm gonna add air to this so I can get to my 51 millimeter desired sag mark and just see what that relates to here on the O-ring at the shock shaft. Now I'm kind of realizing that maybe some of you are asking, well, you keep saying 30% or you keep saying 51 millimeters. How did you get there, or how do you know that's the target? I would say that as far as percentages go, it's a pretty understood concept that 30% is a safe starting place for most bikes. If you ever have questions or you are uncertain, obviously XC bikes to DH bikes are going to have different parameters or ideal suspension setups to achieve the performance that they're designed to have. So you can always verify that with the brand. A lot of brands will hide that stuff on their site, or you can always, most brands have like a chat or DM option. So you could reach out, ask them, what's the leverage rate? What's the shock stroke length on my bike if you need to know that? Or you could just say, I have this particular model of bike. What percent sag do you suggest I run? And if you really want to get into it, you could write them and ask, how many millimeters of sag should I run on this bike? And that would be a great way for you to really learn what is the optimum setup. Now, again, this is not for everybody, not for every terrain. This is just a good starting point, right? Everybody rides in different locations, has different riding styles, right? There could be a 190-pound rider. Well, let's just say Kyle Straight. He weighs a little bit more than I am, that big buff monster. But he rides this bike and he probably has like 15% sag, because what he's doing is ridiculous, right? And then Tyler McCall, who I think is a little bit lighter than I am, also riding this bike, but he probably is running as much or more air pressure than I am for massive jumps and drops he's doing. Whereas someone who's maybe riding a bunch of really wet routes, super loose conditions, and they're looking for a whole bunch of traction, could be undersprung and running softer pressure so that they can maximize their composure over rough and rowdy terrain. Based on the travel of this bike, rear wheel travel, which is what ideally you want to set your sag based off of, 51 millimeters is where I need to be to get 30% sag. I increased air pretty significantly. As far as the shock O-ring is concerned, I'm probably at about 27% sag. So how big of a difference is that really? Does that make a big noticeable difference on the trail? I guess that depends, really. To some people, that might make a pretty notable difference. For others, it might not at all. What I would say is, based on, the wide range of riders that I have encountered on the trail, people that I have gone out with, what I would genuinely say that my observation is, a lot of people run way too much sag or way too soft of an air shock, whether that's they just don't check it very often. It's taken them way too long to add air, or they just never set it up properly to begin with when they bought the bike. But either way, I know quite a few riders that are newer to the sport who have had pretty significant and traumatic injuries, whether that's, broken toes, ankles, or even greater extent, like, a good friend of mine clipped a pedal really hard, stopped him dead. He got ejected over the other side of the bike and broke his collarbone. And I think that there's a lot of people that are out there riding and they, probably aren't watching this video and going to be prepared to spend, money on a product like this. But what I will say is, at the very least, maybe try to find a shop that can help you, or get a shock pump yourself and try to figure out a way to set up 30% as a rough starting point. And for what it's worth, maybe take note of where you're currently at, so that way you can gauge how big of a change or an improvement, or sometimes you might notice a decrease in performance. That is possible. If you've gotten used to this really plush, Cadillac feel because your air spring is so soft, you might notice that it feels a little bit stiffer and harsher. But where do you notice gains? Pedaling efficiency, pop, liveliness of the bike. And as you make those changes, you might also need to make changes to compression, as well as to your rebound. You might have to slow things down or add a little bit more compression, or take compression out. So there's a lot of stuff to focus on, but I would say that, starting with a good sag that's repeatable, that's easily checkable, is going to be the starting point for getting your mountain bike feeling good. And most importantly, I would say keeping it feel safe for you. It's going to maximize performance. It's going to hopefully keep you off the ground and let you really tap into the full potential of the bike and yourself as a rider. So that said, what are some of the nitpicks about this product? not all of the axle attachments are great. Some of them are a little bit wobbly. Obviously that depends on your axle. There are a few different attachment points. Hopefully you'll find the right one that fits your bike. Another talking point that I would say is a bit of a tough one is the price. You know, while we can totally justify it, and I think shops, demo centers, skills coaches, there's a lot of people that could easily justify the $299 price tag. Luckily for our fans out there, if you use Wolfpack, you'll get 40% off, which I would say makes this a much more reasonable purchase. But at retail, for just the average consumer, unless you're like a real big suspension nerd and you love this kind of stuff, you know, that might be a little bit of a tough pill to swallow. But again, at 40% off, I think it's a lot easier to kind of justify that expense. The app database is really nice. There is more functionality that, you know, to be honest, I don't know exactly how realistic and usable it is, but you know, they claim that you can check the efficiency, the smoothness, or the need for service out of your suspension by doing tests. That's not something we've ever utilized. Not to say that it wouldn't do that. I can't attest to that. I don't know how often or realistic people would be using that, but let us know in the comments if you think that's something that neat and you would use this for. So yeah, overall, I think for the most part, at the 40% discount, it's a product that I would recommend, unless you're a big business, and then I think the time and effort you would save in setting a suspension up on a whole bunch of bikes would be well worth it. Overall, we really, really like it. It has helped our test crew set up bikes in a much more fast, efficient manner, as well as a more accurate manner. So there it is, the Slacker MTB Pro Kit. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next video.